was turned back on Wednesday despite approvals for the mission carrying medicines and nutrition. Mr. Elders says that they were held for 8 hours at checkpoints. Was turned back on Wednesday 13 hours to move just 40 kilometers. Mr. Elders says that they were held for 8 hours at checkpoints, and it took 13 hours to move just 40 kilometers. A group of senior UN officials and heads of international non-governmental organizations issued a statement yesterday in which they called for the immediate and unconditional release of all personnel held in Yemen by the Houthi de facto authorities. The officials in the joint statement said that they are extremely concerned about the Houthi de facto authorities' recent detention of 17 members of the UN and international NGOs, and many others associated with civil society organizations, national and international NGOs, and other organizations supporting humanitarian activities. These detentions are unprecedented, not only in Yemen but globally, and directly impede our ability to reach the most vulnerable people in Yemen, including the 18.2 million people who need humanitarian aid and protection. They asked the de facto authorities to confirm the exact whereabouts of those detained and the conditions in which they are being held, as well as for immediate access to them. All those detained must be immediately released, they added. The signatories include the heads of UNDP, UNESCO, UNICEF, WFP, WHO, and the Human Rights Office. This weekend, the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed will travel to Paris, France to take part on Monday in the SDG 4 High-Level Steering Committee and the opening of the Transforming Education Summit, Stocktake, aimed at galvanizing global efforts to transform education and achieve Sustainable Development Goal 4. While in Paris, the Deputy Secretary General will also meet with senior government officials and other stakeholders, including on issues relating to development finance, debt, and global taxation issues. She will return to New York next Tuesday. At the invitation of the President of the Swiss Confederation, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, will travel to Switzerland over the weekend to attend as an observer the Summit on Peace in Ukraine to be held in Bergenstock. The United Nations reiterates its support for just and sustainable peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant General Assembly resolutions. This morning, the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice Wairimu Nderitu, briefed Security Council members on the implementation of Resolution 2686 on tolerance and international peace and security. Among other issues, this resolution refers to the importance of combating intolerance, promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue, advancing human rights, promoting women's full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation and leadership at all levels of decision-making, strengthening education for peace, and addressing and countering hate speech. Ms. Nderitu encouraged council members to continue the consideration of hate speech, including by requesting more regular briefings on this topic by relevant UN entities. She also encouraged them to continue engaging with tech and social media companies to emphasize their roles and responsibilities in tackling online hate speech, and to continue supporting the inclusion of women in the peace and security agenda, including on issues relating to countering hate speech against women. Ms. Nderitu's briefing comes ahead of the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, which is next Tuesday. And this afternoon at 3 p.m., the Security Council will reconvene for a briefing on threats to international peace and security. The High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, is expected to brief Council members. Turning to the situation in Sudan, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, warned that the humanitarian nightmare in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, is worsening by the hour. In a social media post, he said he hopes the Security Council resolution adopted yesterday will ease the suffering of civilians in the city. Mr. Griffiths stressed that they must be protected, aid must be able to reach them, and the fighting must stop now. Meanwhile, our colleagues from the World Food Programme in Sudan are underscoring the urgency of getting food to people in need before rains cut off access to remote areas. The agency reports that a convoy carrying aid for some 160,000 people crossed into Darfur this week from Chad. Is the third convoy to enter the country through the Tyne border crossing in the past 2 months. That assistance is bound for Central, East, and West Darfur. WFP says food distributions are also underway for over 50,000 people in South Darfur and an estimated 200,000 people in Al-Jazeera state. The distributions there are the first since conflict spread to the state capital, Wad Madani, and other parts of Sudan's breadbasket in December. Our colleagues from the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, tell us that they recently held a 3-day electoral administration skills training session in Yambio, West Equatoria, as the country prepares for elections. The training, attended by civil society representatives and members of the National Election Committee, focused on understanding standards, principles, and administrative techniques crucial for the smooth functioning of the electoral process. Meanwhile, the mission recently built and handed over a new police post in Yambio to support local authorities in strengthening the rule of law and protection of civilians. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, today called for concrete measures to halt the human rights violations and abuses that continue to endanger reconciliation and peace in Ethiopia. His call came as his office issued an update that presents an analysis of the human rights situation across Ethiopia from January 2023 to January this year. The update says that violent conflicts, particularly in the Amhara and Oromia regions, have led to serious human rights violations and abuses in 2023. In the North Tigray region, there was a significant improvement in the human rights situation following the cessation of hostilities agreement in November 2022. But the Human Rights Office says that concerns persist regarding ongoing violations by members of the Eritrean Defense Forces. You can find the update online. And the Human Rights Office has also issued a report which found that the global fight against female genital mutilation is being undermined by the practice of crossing national borders and beyond to have girls undergo the procedure. The report adds that although many states have intensified their efforts to eradicate female genital mutilation, the practice continues across the world, in part due to, quote, the clandestine nature of cross-border and transnational female genital mutilation, close quote. An estimated 4.3 million girls were at risk of being subjected to this practice in 2023. The full report is online. Today is World Blood Donor Day, and the theme of this year is 20 years of celebrating giving. Thank you, blood donors. The World Health Organization points out that blood transfusion saves lives and improves health, but many patients requiring transfusion do not have timely access to safe blood. Providing safe and adequate blood should be an integral part of every country's national healthcare policy and infrastructure. Tomorrow is World Elder Abuse Day, with the theme Spotlight on Older Persons in Emergencies, emphasizing the urgent need to protect and support older individuals during crises. And Sunday is the International Day of Family Remittances, which highlights the economic impact of this money on households, communities, and nations, and recognizes the sacrifice, separation, and generosity often involved. And then Monday is the World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. In his message, the Secretary General notes that the security, prosperity, and health of billions of people rely on thriving lands supporting lives, livelihoods, and ecosystems. But we're vandalizing the earth that sustains us, he says, adding that every second, around 4 football fields of healthy land are degraded. And we end the week with the good news that another member state has paid its dues. Elephants are a big part of this country's national identity. Earlier this month, the nation proudly welcomed the rare birth of twin elephants, a male and a female. Any guesses which country? Yeah. You got it. Amelie's right. It's Thailand. So yes, we thank our friends in Thailand for taking us to 115 fully paid up member states. And last, he's not here, but I hope he's watching on TV. Seasons change and reporters have to move on, but it still makes me a little sad to say goodbye to Alan Bulkati, who's been here as the UN correspondent for RIA Novosti and is now returning to the Russian Federation.
Comes up not hear any?
Huh? What? Huh? I don't know what that was. Alan has been a valued participant at the noon briefing, and even when he had to ask us questions on weekends or late in the evening, he was always unfailingly polite and considerate. Alan has been a gentleman in the truest sense of the word, and I wish him the best even as he leaves New York. And before we go to our guest, Amelie, since you won, you get to ask the first question.
Thanks, Farhan. I have a question on Afghanistan. The Doha meeting is approaching. It's been a few weeks now that Ms. DiCarlo handed over the invitation to the Taliban. So any information on that front? And there are sources saying that there are doubts about whether the meeting is going to happen altogether. Do you have any comment on that? And what would be the consequences if the meeting does not happen?
I don't want to speculate about that possibility. Obviously, until arrangements are finalized, every meeting has the possibility that it may or may not take place. For now, we're continuing to proceed with making arrangements. We hope that it will work out, and closer to the date, we expect to be able to announce arrangements once those are finalized. But at this stage, of course, we're still in preparations. Regarding that, you saw the language we put out about the invitation being extended, and we'll have to see what the result is. Edie and then Deji.
Thank you, Farhan. Has there been any reaction from the Houthis to the spate of letters and appeals yesterday for the release of the UN and NGO staffers?
On that, no. At this stage, there's nothing to say by way of response, either to yesterday's appeal or to the appeal that was made today by our human rights colleagues in Geneva in the name of Volker Turk. So we're continuing to make various appeals, but there's no improvement in the conditions that I can report back.
Another follow-up and then a question. Will Rosemary DiCarlo be speaking at any event in Switzerland related to the Ukraine meeting?
I don't know whether she'll be asked in any informal capacity, but we're there as an observer, so there's no formal remarks anticipated. And
on Gaza, can you give us an update on what's happening with fuel deliveries? A little while ago, the situation was dire. Things were being rationed. Has more fuel been getting in?
What I've been told is that that there have been small amounts getting in, but as we pointed out about a week ago, it's a minimal amount, and so we have had to restrict some activities, and so that situation continues to be the case, and we're hoping for a much more regular and fuller supply of fuel for our activities.
And as a final question, is there any update on the review on the U.S. pier?
To reiterate, the World Food Program, of course, remains in charge of logistics and has not been able to report any resumption of activities. And our security colleagues are still working to ensure that secure conditions for humanitarian work can be reestablished. Deji.
Edie just asked my first question. But anyway, two parts. First, on Ukraine, has the UN officially announced that who will be participating in the peace summit already?
For which?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's Rosemary DiCarlo. It's that announcement I made is about her participating as an observer at the Bergenstock meeting.
So today, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed what he called a peace advice to negotiate with the Ukrainian side. I don't know whether the Secretary General has already seen that proposal, and what is his position?
Well, on that, I think what we can say about that is what we've been saying, that what we want to see in Ukraine is peace based on the United Nations Charter and the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and in accordance with international law.
Okay, and then on Gaza, yesterday Ms. Gamba said the CAC report is a action-originated report, so she will engage with the parties on that list. Has she ever in contact with Israeli government?
She's had contacts with the Israeli government prior to this. I believe she talked to you about this yesterday in her briefing.
So today, I think yesterday, the Israeli government said that they will have some reaction, and they are debating on how to react on that list. Any reaction from the Secretary General?
I don't want to speculate on what actions will be taken, so we'll have to see what their response is.
Are you ready for the action?
We're ready for any actions from any member states. Obviously, we work with all member states trying to promote a good, healthy relationship between the United Nations and the member states of the United Nations, and we'll continue to do so in this case. Gabriel.
Thank you, Farhan. Today, the U.S. government designated an Israeli group called the Tazov 9 a violent extremist Israeli group that has been, according to the U.S. government, blocking, harassing, and damaging convoys carrying aid into Gaza. I know you don't comment specifically on decisions by member states per se. However, some of this aid was UN aid going in. You've spoke about it in the past. The Secretary General has. What is the hope now that this designation might assist in radical Israeli groups attacking aid going into Gaza from the UN?
Our hope is that whatever happens, that there are no attacks on UN or other humanitarian convoys going into Gaza, given the essential need of such aid to saving the lives of the people inside Gaza. And so we continue to implore all parties to make sure that aid goes through without any hindrance or obstruction.
Can I ask one other question, Farhan? Sure. Thank you. There are reports that the U.S. might have to dismantle this floating pier again in the coming hours or days. You get a lot of questions about this pier. How would the Secretary General characterize how it's working? There have been humanitarian organizations that have said publicly it's just become a very expensive distraction. Would the Secretary General concur to some degree with that characterization?
I'll just repeat what we've been saying. This has been an additionality to our aid efforts in terms of getting aid in. So we welcome it in that regard, but we have never relied on it as the main way of getting aid in, given the imperative need, in particular, to get aid in by road. Sharifa.
Thank you, Farhan. I have a question on the increasing tension on the Israeli-Lebanese border. There are footages circulating on social media showing Israeli forces using a type of catapult to launch fireballs into southern Lebanon to ignite fire. And it seems that this would have significant impacts in an area where they're trying to actually prevent forest fires due to increasing heat. There are also reports claiming that the Israeli army is using this to reduce costs, so it looks like we're back in medieval times. Do you have a reaction to this?
Well, my reaction is simply to repeat what I said at the top of this briefing, that we are encouraging all parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action or statement that could further fuel tensions, and that we're continuing to engage with the parties and urge all actors to avoid hostile actions, return to a cessation of hostilities under Resolution 1701, and work towards a diplomatic solution. Yes, please, in the back.
Thank you, Damilola for Pass Blue. This is sort of a repetition of my email to you yesterday. Might you have words now on what the UN is doing in Sudan? Second question, interview with MSF, we were told, Pasblu was told, that the UN is not present in El Fasher, and all the 26 agencies that used to be there before the war are no longer operating in El Fasher or anywhere in Sudan. What's your response to this, and what exactly is the situation? Also, in a separate interview with some Sudanese authorities, we were told that the Sudanese provided aid routes and passports to UN aid workers so that they can access and provide aids in this place, but that hasn't happened. Just asking why is the UN not using any of these routes?
First of all, we do use aid routes when we have the access granted. So we've been pushing to make sure that we have access to use aid routes throughout. Of course, one of the problems is the intensity of conflict, which is itself hindering aid from traveling. And so we, and of course the Security Council yesterday, are calling for the fighting to be halted to allow, among other things, for aid to get in. The Secretary General remains deeply concerned over the fighting in and around El Fasher and across the country. A ceasefire is urgently needed to prevent further atrocities, protect critical infrastructure, and alleviate civilian suffering. Yesterday's resolution, Resolution 2736, calls for an immediate halt to the fighting and for de-escalation in and around El Fasher. A de-escalation could be the first step towards finding a sustainable solution to the conflict, and I would add towards making sure that humanitarian aid can get in. Regarding our presence, we do not have any international aid staff present in Al Fasher. I would point out that we do have staff present in Port Sudan, so there are staff still working in different parts of Sudan where possible. Okay, Deshi, and then we'll go to our guest.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question on the delivery of humanitarian aids in Gaza. We heard a lot about the difficulties of delivering aids now in Gaza Strip. Do you have any data how much of those aids has been looted by Hamas, or how did Hamas ever in past few months ever try to loot those aids for military purposes?
I wouldn't be able to attribute necessarily responsibility. Obviously, there have been diversion of aid, or what my comrade Stefan referred to as self-distribution. A lot of that has been actually from hungry crowds who have been worried that once there's aid shipments going in, that it would be a one-time only thing, and so they wanted to make sure that they would get that aid. So part of the problem is being able to reassure the local communities that there will be a regular flow of aid, and that therefore each aid delivery is not simply their last chance to get food. But so we need more regular distributions. But certainly there has been looting. And we're trying to get evaluations about how much of the stock has been lost.
But are those lootings from Hamas? Can you?
I have no confirmation, like I said, in terms of attribution of who has been taking what. All right, let's go to our guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, great. We're very pleased to be joined by our guest, Mohammed Mustafa Malik Fall, the UN Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, and he can talk to you about the situation in that country. Mr. Fall, welcome.
Let me just see where to put it on. Thank you so much, Farhan, for this opportunity to put on light on Nigeria, and thanks also for attending. It's for me an opportunity to remind the importance of Nigeria. It's the biggest country in sub-Saharan Africa, the top 3 economy, a country with vast potential and vast opportunity, but a country also which is facing a lot of challenges. And in the potential, it's not only the natural resources or the human capital that the country has, but it is also the political and the leadership role that the country plays in a region that is, as we speak, shaken by a number of challenges, including in the Sahel, where we know what the political situation and extreme violence and terrorism is representing for the people. But as I was saying, Nigeria do also face many challenges. I think conflict are still prevailing in good part of the country. We have the northeast, where you had over a decade of insurgency from Boko Haram, which is being now controlled more and more. At least the situation is much better than it used to be a few years ago. We are having also insecurity prevailing in the northwest. We have seen also climate-related shock impacting people's life and triggering number of displacement, and also triggering or driving conflict, because we have what we call farmers and herdsmen conflict, which to me is originated from the climate crisis and the movement of the herdsmen for better grazing land. Recently, the country has gone through peaceful election, which allow the administration of President Tinubu to take over from May 2023. They came with a very ambitious agenda that they call the Renewed Hope agenda, which is focusing on agriculture, food security, on poverty alleviation, job creation, access to capital, inclusion, rule of law, and improved security. Now this is the first year. Number of results that are expected through this agenda hasn't come out yet. We are also seeing some of the bold steps that were taken to reform the economy, provoking at a certain point difficulties for good margin of the people, because the inflation rate is quite high as we speak. Although all the economists are predicted that we will get round to the corner maybe from now to the end of the year or early next year. But in the meantime, we are seeing prices getting higher, mainly food prices, which is impacting negatively on the possibility of people to access to decent life. We, UN, we align with this Renewed Hope agenda and are supporting at two levels the government of Nigeria. One is the humanitarian assistance that help us to improve life, to save life, to reduce vulnerability, but we are working also on massive undertaking that can help the development of the country to move forward around priorities that are in the acceleration transition of the SDG and around aspects which are so critical for Nigeria, like the social protection scheme, the safety net, mainly in the context where inflation and food crisis is impacting negatively the most vulnerable people. Maybe I will stop there and just take questions so that we can go in depth into the conversation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fall. I'll now turn the floor over for questions. Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. The World Bank yesterday announced that it had approved a $2.25 billion loan for Nigeria, apparently aimed at shoring up revenue and for supporting economic reforms that, as you say, have contributed to the worst cost of living crisis in many years in Nigeria. Can you tell us what impact you believe that this loan will have? And also, I note that you called Nigeria one of the top 3 economies. I believe South Africa's first. What's second? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, let me come back. Yes, I think, as I was saying, the reform that has been taken has come with courageous measures, like looking at the subsidy, which was not impacting very much in the well-being of the people of Nigeria, because sometimes you subsidize fuel or you subsidize food prices, and then it goes to the neighbor country because of the depreciation of the naira. Maybe dealers would make much better margin when they go to those things. And I think that there is a whole debate around these things. But what I would say on the World Bank is that the loan also allow to the government to create what we call a kind of increase and consolidated safety net. I think part of the loan, 800 million, will go to a cash transfer program, which will enable the government to increase the number of households that are benefiting from the social support from 3 million households to 15 million households. 15 million households, it's like maybe in terms of number of people, it could impact up to 70 million people, considering that every household will have 5, 6 to 7 people. I think that's on that one, it's a great point. And I think the other one is that also One of the big problems is also the depreciation of the naira and how you control the stabilization of the naira and the exchange rate between the naira and the dollar. And I think the scarcity of dollar sometimes also impact very badly in the depreciation of the currency. And I guess that having more access to hard currency will allow the central bank to have a policy that will better control the currency exchange rate and the currency value compared to dollar or to other hard currency. Now, on the economy, I believe that the third biggest would be Egypt. And let me just say that until recently, I think Nigeria was the biggest economy. I think they lost the position of #1 because of the depreciation of the currency, because, you know, the GDP is calculated in dollar. If you have an asset which is now, I don't know, this X amount of dollar, and that depreciate, it puts you in a position that your value in terms of hard currency fall, and I think that's what put them in a situation. Otherwise, until I think 2-3 years ago, Nigeria was the first economy. Even they outpaced South Africa in 2016.
Yeah, not per capita, but
Yeah.
overall. Yeah.
It's overall. It's the size of the economy, not per capita. For sure, per capita, because Nigeria being 220 million people, if they have a GDP of $400 billion and close to South Africa, which is 60 million people, definitely per capita, the situation will be much higher. But here I was just referring to the size of the economy in terms of absolute number of value of the economy in US dollar.
Gabriel?
Hi, Mr. Fall. My name is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Thank you for the briefing. It's very informative. I appreciate all the information. My question is about internally displaced people in Nigeria. In March, you put out a statement, I believe, about the alleged kidnapping. At the time, it was alleged kidnapping of several hundred women and girls and others from an IDP camp, as you recall. You called on the Nigerian government to provide more jobs for IDPs in camps so they don't have to venture out of the camps that would potentially put them at risk. My question is, do you have any follow-up on that from response from the government at all? And my second question is, I know your remit is Nigeria, not Sudan, but given what's going on in Sudan and the terrible humanitarian situation there, how do you view the situation in Sudan affecting or spillover effects now or in the future if the situation should get even worse? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's true that just when I arrived, there was a mass abduction around a local government area around the Lake Chad called Ngala, and for which I had made a statement urging the government to find a solution to increase the protection of the displaced population. Let me say that we have gone through few steps forward since then. 3 weeks ago, Nigeria launched what we call the State Plan for Durable Solution for the IDPs as part of the Secretary General panel recommendation and the action agenda for internally displaced people. And I think out of the 15 countries that was chosen within this initiative, Nigeria was the first to have its plan completed and the plan launched. And it was done with not only the presence of the Assistant Secretary General Robert Piper, who coordinated the initiative, but it was done also in the presence of the Vice President, the governor of the 3 states where the insurgency of Boko Haram is prevailing and where you have the bigger number of displaced, but also other states that have displacement issues which are triggered by intercommunal violence or which are triggered, as I say earlier, by climate-related shock. What we have seen now is increased commitment from the government to protect the IDP, but not to protect them only in terms of security, but also to provide them with livelihood, to put a return policy or a reintegration policy or a resettlement policy. All the pathways that are in the Secretary General initiative are there, and helping to maybe find the best way to restore the dignity of those people. Because, as I say, the conflict with Boko Haram started 2009. Some of this displacement get to a certain number around 2015-16, and you have people who have been living in those IDP sites, I mean, for like 9 years. solely depending on humanitarian assistance to a point that some of them would even lose their resilience capacity or their ability to go back to livelihood. Now, you have necessarily a need to combine securities, because in those perimeters that you go for farming or you go for herd scattling, you always need to make sure that the population are protected from the security point of view, but at the same time you need to give them some of the basics that they will need, whether in terms of skill or in terms of input for their farming activities. And those are the points that and of course you need also to restore some of the infrastructure, like house, like school, like health facilities. And that's what the state plan meant. And the point I wanted to highlight is that not only Nigeria was the first to launch the state plan, but the commitment we have seen from the state level. The governor are taking the leadership role. They show the ambitions, the vision, but the drive to really take this plan. We help them technically to elaborate the plan. I think for the 3 states, we are talking about $4 billion for the 3 to 4 years to come, to which each state have agreed to commit a part of their budget, like 15% in Borno, I think 14% in Adamawa, in Yobe, and maybe a bit smaller number in Adamawa because they have less displaced people. And the federal government also, through the vice president who chaired the launch, have committed also to continue to support. And I think that's the way we go, not only to reduce the vulnerability, to save life of those IDP, but as I say, most importantly, to give them back their dignity, and by relocating them, by resettling them, by reinstalling them where they belong to.
Thank you. Pass blue.
Thank you. Damilola from Pass Blue. Nigeria's had a lot of cash transfers in the past that usually people get this money a couple of months and then they go back to the way things were before the cash transfers. On the loan, what's the efficiency of getting loans only for people to get few naira for a couple of months and then they go back to the way it used to be 6 months ago without plans for sustainability, for people to continue to be able to afford things? What's the efficiency? And this is loan that has to be repaid. What do you think about this?
A good question. I think that's a question that comes to everyone's mind when we talk about social protection. What is the durability and what is the sustainability of the initiative? As we speak, there is, yes, a loan coming from the government, but from World Bank, but it's not only the loan that is contributing to this social protection scheme. You do have also the government allocated a certain fund that was assembled to contribute. I think you have like $450 million coming from the government internal resources. But what we are advising the government is that these are good measures for an immediate action to reduce the suffering and to reduce the difficulties that the people are facing. But it doesn't take us away, it doesn't take away, some of the challenge that people are facing unless this is sustained through a program of investment, which is not depending on any foreign assistance, but depends mostly on the government commitment to pursue this as part of their poverty alleviation line. And I just want to give one example. Now, as we are discussing with the Minister of Finance, we are finding a way to scale up the immediate response, mainly moving from 3 to 15 million households. But we are telling them also that they should start preparing a plan where an investment coming from the government budget should go up to like 3% of the GDP of the country, because that's what we see as an experience that can really help to sustain and that can have an impact. Now, the immediate measure would be maybe to purchase food, to purchase things that are important for the survival of the most vulnerable community. But also this social protection scheme is not only in terms of cash. It is also what we call the homegrown food program, which is a school feeding program that target like 10 to 12 million people across certain number, the children going to school in certain number of states. Sometimes it comes like access to health facilities for women that are pregnant or that are lactating and that are particularly vulnerable. And sometimes also it comes as a support for the health of people who are mostly vulnerable, because when you have food insecurity, you have also malnutrition. And usually malnutrition among children, and mainly children under 5, is a leading cause to death. Now, we should not just look at the social protection scheme like only the cash we are transferring to household, but the cash is supported also by other interventions that make them much more impactful in the well-being of the families and in the well-being of the most vulnerable people, who are the children, the women, as I say, pregnant, lactating, elderly, or people living with disability. Back to you.
Thanks. Are there any further questions? Last chance? Okay. Then if not, I would like to again to thank our guest, Mohammed Mustafa Malik Fall. Thanks very much for coming, and I hope that whenever you're in town, you can come and see the press corps here.
Thank you so much, and thanks for participating. And as always, we count on the media to keep a light on Nigeria, because as I say, it's not only the most important country in Africa, but as I always say, if we make it in Nigeria, we make it for the rest of Africa and the rest of the world. And if we fail to do it in Nigeria, it will be a failure of the continent and the failure of the rest of the world. Thank you so much for your attention.
It's like the Frank Sinatra song. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Anywhere.
Have a great 3-day weekend. We'll see you all on Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so
That was a
much.
really great evening. Thanks. It's great to see you.
Yeah.